My name is Mary Thompson. I'm 59 years old, and I've lived in the same quiet town in Indiana for most of my life. I used to think I had a simple, predictable routine morning coffee at 6, a call from my son Jacob every Sunday afternoon, and the peace that comes with knowing your family is safe. Jacob wasn't just my son. He was my friend, my lifeline after my husband passed. He'd tell me about Eli's school projects, his latest work stress, or the lasagna he burned again, trying to follow my recipe. Those calls weren't long, but they were everything, and I never realized how much I depended on them until they stopped. It began as a small, nagging worry. One missed call turned into 3. Then a week passed, and his voicemail stayed the same. I told myself he was busy, maybe traveling for work, but that quiet tug in my chest wouldn't let go. By day 10, I found myself watching the phone, checking for a new text that never came. I tried not to panic. I made excuses for him out loud, like that would make them more real. But the silence had weight. It wasn't absence, it was something else. I called his office, hoping they'd laugh and say he was just on vacation. Instead, there was a pause. A voice said, "I haven't seen Jacob this week." It sounded harmless, but in that moment, I knew something was wrong. Not just strange. Wrong. That night, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the steam curling off my mug, thinking about the last time Jacob had called. It was short, rushed. He said Eli was sick and he'd call back later. He never did. I still remember the tone in his voice. It was tight, like he was trying to hold something in. I didn't sleep much after that. Every creak in the house made me sit up in bed. I kept replaying conversations in my head, trying to remember if he'd said something I missed. I called again and again. Nothing. Not even a single read receipt on my texts. By the 14th day, I packed a bag. I told my neighbor I'd be gone for a while, locked my door, and boarded the first Greyhound to Chicago. The whole ride there, I stared out the window, my hands gripping my purse like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I didn't know what I was walking into. I just knew a mother feels these things. There's a kind of silence that doesn't ask questions. It screams them. And I was ready to find out what it was hiding. Jacob's neighborhood looked the same as I remembered. Trees lining the sidewalk, kids' bikes tipped over in driveways, leaves blowing gently across manicured lawns. Nothing about it warned me that something terrible had happened here. I climbed the porch steps slowly, each one heavier than the last. The front door was closed but not locked. That alone made my chest tighten. Jacob was careful. He never left the door open. Not with Eli in the house. I turned the knob and felt it give without resistance. Inside, the silence hit me first. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the air had been drained from the walls. Then, I saw the mess. The couch was pushed crookedly from the rug, and a coffee mug lay shattered on the hardwood. Tiny shards spread out like stars, and a dark stain had sunk deep into the carpet nearby. I called out softly, hoping for a voice to answer back. Nothing. Just the creak of the floor beneath my shoes. A toy truck sat in the corner with its wheels missing. The curtains were drawn, and the whole room smelled faintly sour, like old food and something else I couldn't name. I stepped around the broken glass, heart pounding, and made my way to the kitchen. The fridge light blinked inside an empty box. A chair had been knocked over. One drawer was open, with utensils scattered, as if someone had left in a hurry. Everything felt off. Lived in, but wrong. Upstairs, the hallway stretched darker than I remembered. I whispered Eli's name, gently, afraid of what might answer. Room after room. I peeked in. Bed unmade. Lights off. Toys untouched. In Jacob's room, the sheets were twisted, and one pillow lay on the floor, the imprint of his head still faint on the mattress. Then I reached Eli's room. I pushed the door open slowly, holding my breath. The room looked still, but as I took a step inside, I heard it. A faint, steady scraping sound, like plastic dragging across wood. I froze, eyes locked on the bed. My fingers gripped the doorframe as I leaned in, listening. That sound, it was coming from underneath. The scraping sound didn't stop. It was soft, rhythmic, like something barely alive was trying to be heard without being found. I stood there frozen, afraid to move any closer. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. I whispered Eli's name, but my voice cracked before I could finish. I stepped back slowly, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. I dialed 911 and tried to keep my voice steady, but the words tumbled over each other. I told them I was at my son's house. Something was wrong. I thought my grandson might be under the bed, but I was too afraid to look. The dispatcher stayed on the line until the officers arrived. Their boots echoed through the house like thunder. I led them up the stairs, my legs barely holding me. One officer knelt beside the bed, gently calling out. There was no answer, just that soft scraping. Still, steady. With a quick motion, he lifted the bed frame. What I saw knocked the air from my lungs. Eli was curled up tightly, his knees tucked to his chest. His skin was pale, his cheeks sunken, and his lips dry and cracked. He held a crumpled plastic bottle in both hands, like it was the only thing keeping him alive. His eyes were open, but they didn't see us. They stared past the officers, past me, fixed on something we couldn't reach. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one moved. Then the younger officer gently scooped him up, cradling him like glass. I followed as they rushed him out the door. The cold air hit us hard, but Eli didn't flinch. I climbed into the back of the ambulance beside him, whispering his name, brushing his hair from his forehead. He didn't respond, not even a blink, just held that bottle tight, like his whole world was inside it. At the hospital, Eli lay still under the fluorescent lights. Machines hummed softly around him, tracking every beat, every breath, as if watching for the moment he might come back to us. I sat beside his bed, clutching the edge of the blanket, afraid that if I blinked too long, he'd slip further away. His hand was so small in mine. Cold, stiff, yet still clinging to that empty bottle, like it was all he had left. I whispered his name again and again, hoping something in my voice might pull him out of wherever he had gone. But his eyes stayed distant, staring through the ceiling. Jacob would have never let it get this far. He was the kind of father who read bedtime stories twice, just because Eli asked for the silly voices. He'd show up at school lunches with mismatched socks and superhero napkins. There wasn't a day that boy didn't feel loved. But I knew things hadn't been easy, especially after Allison. She was sweet in the beginning, nervous around me, polite. But over time, that nervousness turned into distance, then avoidance. Jacob brushed it off, said she had a lot on her plate. I didn't press, but I should have. It started with little things, calls from debt collectors. Jacob is selling his car out of nowhere. Then one day, he showed up at my house with Eli, unannounced, asking if they could stay the weekend. He didn't say why, but his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Eventually, he told me about the gambling, about how Allison had gotten in deep, and the fights had turned ugly. He tried to keep the family together. He believed people could change if you just loved them hard enough. I admired that in him. But sometimes love isn't enough. After the divorce, Jacob had full custody. Things seemed better. He looked lighter, and Eli smiled more in the photos he sent. But now, sitting in that hospital chair, I couldn't help but wonder if peace had only been temporary, if something from that past had clawed its way back. It was the third night in the hospital when Eli stirred. His fingers moved first, tugging gently at the edge of my sleeve. I leaned in close, not wanting to startle him, barely breathing as his lips began to move. His voice was thin, barely above a whisper. It was the rain, he said. He remembered it pounding hard against the windows that night. He was building a Lego tower when the doorbell rang, not once, but again and again. Jacob looked through the peephole and told Eli to go hide. to get under the bed and stay quiet no matter what. I could see him reliving it. His eyes didn't blink. He just stared at the blanket in his lap as he spoke. He said his dad pulled the comforter down, kissed his forehead, and whispered that everything would be okay. Then the voices came. He said he saw her. Allison. She walked in with a man Eli didn't know. She was yelling, saying Jacob owed money, that he needed to pay or else. Jacob stayed calm. He said Eli was with me, that he didn't want trouble. But then the man stepped closer. Eli's fingers dug into my arm as he spoke that part. He said the man shoved Jacob once. Then again. On the second shove, there was a crack. Loud. Jacob hit the edge of the table and collapsed. He didn't move after that. I tried to hold back my tears, but one slipped down my cheek. Eli said he didn't come out. He stayed under the bed, waiting, listening. He heard furniture scraping, something heavy being dragged. Then the front door slammed, and everything went quiet. That silence was what broke me. Not the fall, not the blood, but knowing my grandson lay there for hours, frozen in fear, hoping someone would come. I wrapped my arms around him and whispered that he was safe now. But inside, something in me shattered. The detectives called me 2 days later. They had found something. A neighbor across the street had an old security camera mounted above her garage. Most nights it didn't catch much, but on the night Jacob vanished, it recorded just enough. The footage was grainy, hard to make out, through the rain streaking across the lens. But there was no mistaking the shape of the pickup truck idling outside Jacob's house. A few minutes later, 2 figures emerged from the front door. One of them matched Allison's build. The other was taller, broader, and face hidden beneath a hood. They struggled with something long and covered in a tarp. The truck pulled away slowly. The camera caught just a glimpse of the license plate, but not enough to read it. Still, the make and model matched those often reported in connection with local debt collectors. The officer's voice was calm as he explained this. My hands stayed folded in my lap, but I could feel my nails digging into my palms. Then came the part I wasn't ready for. They asked if I knew about Jacob's life insurance. I remembered it instantly. Years ago, after Eli was born, Jacob had shown me the policy with pride. He said he wanted to protect his family no matter what. I assumed it had been updated after the divorce, but it hadn't. The detectives confirmed it. Allison was still listed as the sole beneficiary. If Jacob were declared legally dead, she stood to collect a sizable payout, enough to wipe clean her debts and disappear. The air in the room thickened as I tried to process it. That single oversight, that one unchecked detail, might have cost my son his life. He thought he was being responsible, generous even. But in the wrong hands, generosity can look like opportunity. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying not to let the guilt drown me. I should have asked him. I should have reminded him. But we never think to revisit the details until it's too late. And now, the person he once trusted most may have turned that trust into a motive. The drive to the warehouse felt endless. I sat in the back of the unmarked police car, watching the buildings blur past, each one colder than the last. The farther we got from the city, the more silent it became, like even the wind didn't want to speak. When we pulled up, the place looked abandoned, forgotten by time. Rust streaked the metal siding, and the windows were black with grime. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old oil. The officers led me through a narrow hallway to a smaller building tucked behind the main one. The morgue was silent, except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. A single gurney stood in the center, covered by a white sheet. My legs felt weak as I stepped closer, my breath short and uneven. One of the detectives nodded gently, and the sheet was pulled back. It was Jacob, pale, still, his face frozen in peace, that felt nothing like peace. His jaw, his brows, even the faint scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike as a boy, it was all still him. I didn't cry right away. I just whispered his name, again and again, as if he might open his eyes and smile at me. Later that night, they brought in the man who had helped Allison. His name didn't matter. His eyes were hollow, his voice flat when he spoke. He claimed he barely knew her, said he was promised money from the insurance once it came through. When he saw the evidence laid out, Jacob's blood on the blanket, Allison's coat in the truck, his lies fell apart. He admitted it all. Said Allison had planned everything. She told him what to do, how to move the body, and where to dump it. He even told them where she was hiding, in a foreclosed house miles outside the city, trying to wait out the storm she'd created. They found her that same night, curled up in the corner of a room with peeling wallpaper, the lights cut off, the world closing in. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel relief, just the heavy, echoing ache of truth finally rising to the surface. The courthouse was packed on the first day of the trial. Reporters stood outside with cameras flashing, but inside, everything felt hushed. I sat in the front row, my hand wrapped tightly around Eli's, his small fingers trembling but warm in mine. Allison sat at the defendant's table, dressed in gray, her eyes blank as the charges were read. Her accomplice barely looked up. The judge spoke with clarity, each word ringing like a bell. The prosecutor began with the timeline, laying out the facts piece by piece. Photos of the crime scene were displayed on the screen. The blood-stained carpet, the overturned furniture. The blanket was used to carry Jacob's body. Each image felt like a blow to the chest, but I kept my eyes open. I owed him that. Then came the surveillance footage. The truck, the tarp, the silhouettes in the storm. Allison stared at the screen but said nothing. I watched her jaw tighten when her name was spoken. Eli squeezed my hand harder when the tape ended. The courtroom fell quiet as the prosecutor announced they would now play Eli's recorded statement. I wasn't sure he could sit through it, but he nodded once, brave in that quiet way children are when they've already seen too much. His voice came through the speakers, soft and steady, describing what he saw from under the bed. People in the audience wept. I could hear them sniffle, shifting in their seats. Allison's shoulders began to rise and fall, her hands fidgeting in her lap. When Eli described the moment Jacob fell, her face crumpled. She stood up suddenly, shouting that she never meant to kill him. She only wanted the money. Her voice cracked as she broke down. Her accomplice turned toward her and snapped. He said she planned it all, that she told him what to do, promised him a payout. The judge slammed her gavel to restore order, but the truth had already spilled out for everyone to see. When the verdict was read, I closed my eyes. Guilty of first-degree murder and insurance fraud. Life in prison, no parole. Her partner received 20 years for accessory and concealment. The courtroom held its breath for a second longer before silence returned. I looked down at Eli. He leaned against my side, eyes closed, his head on my arm. Justice doesn't heal everything, but it gives you a place to begin. I held him close and whispered, "We did it." Then we stood and walked out together into the cool light of morning. I brought Eli home with me to Indiana, a week after the trial ended. The house felt different with a child in it again. Like the air had shifted to make room for something fragile and new. The neighbors dropped off casseroles and quiet hugs, their eyes saying more than their words ever could. I set up a small room for him near mine. Nothing fancy, just soft blankets, a nightlight, and a chart on the fridge that helped us track meals and water. We kept the days simple. Wake up, eat together, read stories before bed, one day at a time. He started seeing a counselor in town, a kind woman with a soft voice who let him draw his feelings when he couldn't speak them. He liked sketching trees with roots that went deep, farther than the paper could hold. I told him the roots were good. They kept us steady, even in storms. Sometimes he still wakes up crying. Sometimes he doesn't say much at all. But he lets me hold him now. He doesn't pull away when I touch his shoulder or brush his hair from his eyes. That's something. Each morning, I make us oatmeal and pack his lunch. I walk him to school and wait until he disappears through the front doors. And every single day, before he steps off the porch, I crouch down, look him in the eyes, and say the same 5 words. Grandma is here. You are safe.